I really wanted to keep this project just cheap, easy, and quick. My son needed a desk for his room so he could work on some things, so I'm just using all dimensional construction lumber. It's from the local big box store, Menards, here in the Midwest. This is a 2 by 10 by 8 feet long, and I'm just going to cut it in half so I have two 4-foot long pieces. I'm going to cut the board right here on my workbench, so I'm just using some scrap 2x4s here to get it up off the bench. Now, the reason I don't have the audio in the background of this video is because I play music while I work, and YouTube doesn't like that when it's not your own music. I believe I chose some Ronnie Milsap for this one. Lost in the 50s Tonight. Honestly, playing cassettes and CDs lately in the shop, and I kind of like going back to that. Dimensional lumber like this comes from the store with a roundover on the side, and I'm going to rip that off on the table saw so that I can get a nice joint. I've been using this same saw blade for quite a while now, so I went down to the old Harbor Freight and picked one up. Pretty cheap. I've never used the Harbor Freight blades before, but I'm sure it'll be fine. Lots of people like to comment about the fact that I don't have a riving knife on this table saw. This table saw was made before it was required, and there isn't really a spot to put one. It did come with the over-the-top blade guard that kind of has a splitter on the back. I tried to use that, but it kept getting caught up in it, and I honestly thought it wasn't quite as safe. My next saw will definitely have a riving knife, but this seems to work out okay for me. One of the practices that I use to make sure I don't bind is I make the back side of the fence right here on the back side about a 30-second wider than when it's going into the blade, trying to prevent any pinching. I don't feel like having my coat sucked into the table saw today, so I went ahead and took that off, even though it's about, 12 degrees in the shop right now. Another reason I have the audio off is that I have a 200,000 BTU propane heater blasting right behind me, and it actually does put off quite a bit of noise and a few fumes. When I start to get a little lightheaded, I know it's about perfect in the shop. Still just working on ripping off both ends of this board. You can see on the current top side of this board, there's quite a large snipe, I think that is, all along the center. I really didn't notice it, I guess, at the store. I was kind of in a rush, but I'll just put that on the bottom side. We won't even know it's there. After the edges are ripped off, I just flip them around back and forth, trying to find the two edges that meet up the best, and then I'll go with those. I'll clamp them a few times just to check to make sure I've got the right fit. Then I'll go ahead and mark it with a V so I know which side to put back together. Next, I'm going to do something kind of unnecessary in most cases, but I don't have strong enough clamps or enough clamps, so I'm going to drill some pocket screws and help hold this joint together with those screws. Now I'm ready for the glue up, just using some Titebond 2, I believe this is. Get the finger involved here and spread it around. I'm not totally fixated on getting this to be absolutely perfect. My son just needs the desk, and he's not going to care about the little flaws in it, and it's going to get pretty beat up anyway with everything he does on it. So just getting it done is all I'm going for right now. Everything's clamped, and yes, those are the 3 longest clamps I have, which is why I use the pocket screws. You should probably put the middle screw in and work your way out, but as you can see here, I didn't, and it worked out just fine. Get a little pre-sanding in while the glue's drying. Quick little table saw maintenance tip. If you take some of this paste wax and rub it all over your table saw, and then buff it off after about 10 minutes, the wood moves across the surface so smooth. It's really worth the effort. I was planning on cutting the edges of this board off with the table saw, but 4 feet is a little long for my table, and it kind of hangs off the side and is hard to get a hold of. So I was trying to fashion together here a way that I can rip it off with my circular saw. And this first cut was not good. As I put the square back up to check, you can kind of see me stop, hang out there for a bit, because I'm realizing it is nowhere close to square. So we'll just repeat the exact same process, and hopefully it works better the second time. Yep, doesn't matter how long you stare at it, it's still not square. You should clamp that board down. Hey, you should clamp that board down. Will you? The second time actually ended up pretty good. So I'll just cut the other end off and move on. This time with a clamp. I've really been a fan of a nice chamfer, so that's what I'm doing here. Just a little 45-degree chamfer bit, running it all the way around the edge. Really cleans up the look. I made one of these sanding sticks that fits perfectly on a chamfer. There's it unsanded, and there's the edge sanded. I think it looks fantastic. Gonna wash it down with a little bit of mineral spirits. I didn't show this on camera, but I did sand this 80 grit and then 120 grit. And I didn't go any further because, well, I thought it was good enough. Just putting a tung oil finish on here, flooding the surface. A lot. And then rubbing it all in. I then let this sit for about 20 minutes or so, and then come back and put a second coat on it. After about 24 hours of this tung oil curing, I did end up putting a coat of the paste wax on it. And I've never done that combination before, and I must say it was absolutely exquisite. I love the way that this top turned out. It has a fantastic feel to it. So I think I'll continue to do that in the future. I'm going to go very simple again with the legs here. I did this on the workbench video that I made before. Just using some 2x4s, not even ripping down the sides or anything, and just screwing them together in an L shape, which you'll see here in just a minute. It's really a very simple way to just kind of throw some legs together. All it takes is clamping them together, pre-drilling, and then zipping some screws in. I didn't even measure the locations of these screws because, well, it doesn't really bother me, I guess. You could then go back and glue some dowels in here so that you wouldn't notice the screws, but once again, I'm in a hurry as always. Up to this point, everything had been going together very well. I hadn't really ran into many issues. But as you can see me just standing here staring at it, I didn't really have a plan to move forward here, and I should have stopped and gave it the night or the next day to really come up with an actual plan. But instead, I just kept pushing forward, and you'll see that kind of comes back to bite me with a not well thought out plan for these legs. I decided to rip some of the leftover 2x4 material down into squares. They're about 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. And I'm going to use these to connect all 4 legs together, which you'll see here in just a minute. This is kind of my idea, but I hadn't thought through how to fasten it all together, and I should have just stopped, but I didn't. This is me cracking my fingers and my wrists trying to figure out what I want to do here. I thought, well, I'll just screw them together. But if you only have one anchor point, such as one screw on the side, it allows for some movement. You need to have 2 fasteners at least on either side in order to prevent this rocking that happens. I was getting pretty frustrated at this point, so I grabbed some glue and thought, well, when the glue dries, it should hold it all together, which in the end it did, but this isn't really my best work. Look at that wobble. 2025 is the year that I slow down and really think about what I'm going to do. No, that's not actually going to happen. I'm just going to keep doing everything the same way as I have been. My son wanted this to be painted. He said green and blue. So, green and blue it is. Once the glue did dry on these, they actually became a lot more sturdy. I put a couple more screws in here and there, and I'm also going to attach the top to the legs with screws. That also helps strengthen it up. I wouldn't put an elephant on here, but it'll work just fine for school books and painting and things like that. Off camera, my 2 boys helped me paint this up a little bit, and they really enjoyed being a part of the process. Here you see me in my finest, a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt, because at this point, I was way too far into this build, as usual, and just needed to get it done. I just measured this up so it looked to be about center, pre-drilled, and then drove these cabinet screws in. I think I put 4 of them in. Lift with the legs, and there's the desk. I really am pretty pleased with how this turned out, if I'm being honest. For one 2x10 and a few 2x4s, I really can't complain. And that top, it really does feel very nice. This should come in use for many years to come.